Okay, so a kid, throwing ball smashes lamp, and a parent's like, you shouldn't have done that. And uh, um, and like, why do they say that? So the the parent, it seems to me, is making a they so the there's an intrinsic bad thing about the lamp being smashed. It's like, oh, there's a loss
Of
of
course.
some order and so forth. And most kids can recognize this as well, as we were just saying, and might even, as a result, already have all the information they need to learn how to not like how to throw more safely indoors. Um, the parent also experiences the intrinsic badness of the lamp getting smashed, like the sense of like, oh, we don't have that lamp anymore, basically, or we're gonna have to like repair it. I have a friend who repaired a very smashed lamp once, and it was a sort of project of love. But uh, and so the parent has this intrinsic bad feeling, but then I think what happens for a lot of people in this situation is that they reflexively, immediately reinterpret the pain of that badness as a story that they should have already done something different to not have that happen.
Mm, right. Like
And
they immediately blame,
right, they
basically.
immediately encounter blameness, and
Yeah.
then they part of that blame wants to go on them for being a
Right.
bad parent. But then
Yeah.
they also are like, oh no, but you need at least some blame for being a bad kid who doesn't understand how throwing works. And in so doing, they pass on the meme that we don't learn from the consequences of our actions. We learn from people telling us that we did something wrong.
Right.
That and actually it distracts the kid from being with the situation of the smashed lamp as it sort of actually is.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you're creating like evil out of consequences or something. Or you're creating like
right.
badness out of consequences.
Yeah. And there's this lovely tweet. It's one of my favorite tweets. Um, is talking about like kids who have like sort of deep wisdom, and I think this really highlights the extent to which like the adult way of relating to feedback is like less wise than how kids by default will just already be living if you let them. Um, and so this simple story goes. Once, when my kid was 4, she dropped her slushy lemonade, and I did the typical mom, you shouldn't have been careless. She looked at me and said, Mommy, I dropped my slushie and was already feeling bad. You could have just said you felt sorry for me.
Right.
It's like that kid recognized that the you shouldn't have been careless was a distraction from her
Right.
learning process.
Yeah.
Not just not necessary, but in the way.
Right.
Um, yeah. Anyway, so um
How does this relate to original spin? Is this original spin?
yeah, great question. So, pretty much precisely. So,
Mhm.
when we were trying to find a name for this confusion that occurs, I was tempted to call it like original psyop or something like that, because it does feel like in some ways, um, it may be one of the sort of foundational confusions upon which many, many other confusions are built.
Yeah.
But it's not quite a psyop in the sense that like a psyop is sort of more deliberate and intentional. Like it actually just
Yeah,
is
it's
a
an operation.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it is a confusion, and we like the term spin because it's sort of there's a kind of like it's like a narrative getting attached to the consequences.
Right.
And then original spin is great because A, it's sort of like very old, and
Right.
B, it's actually very related to original sin.
Yeah.
Um, the idea that whatever it was at whatever points, the well, actually, hang on, I'll come at that from a slightly different angle in a moment. But what I wanted to say also was that one of the things that's been really clarifying about realizing this for me, like I was already relatively healed from this compared to most people. Um,
Yeah.
but but I've realized there's like way deeper to go. And one of the things that's been really powerful for me about this is recognizing that I had previously been trying to drop shoulds without realizing that there was such a strong arrow from pain to should. And so the should gets all of
Right.
this energy from the pain. And what you need to do is turn towards the pain and not get sort of spun into the narrative or the should or the I did something wrongness. It's like because the I did something wrong is a distraction from what in many cases is I didn't like that.
Yeah.
And then my pain gets narrativized as I did something wrong. So like
Right.
as in an external problem, like a
So tell me how
social.
the sage deals with the lamp breaking. Like one who has fully embodied this wisdom, the lamp breaks, there's a lot of energy. Like there was a lot of like negative consequence that in fact happened. There was a lot of
Mhm,
noise, literal noise. Like there's
mhm,
destruction now,
mhm.
and there's like a mess that needs to be cleaned up.
So
So all
so
this exists now,
and
and I feel it in my body as
mhm,
like, ooh, that sucks.
mhm.
What? What do I do? How do I alchemize that?
Yeah. So there's kind of a few things. Like one is um yeah, sort of just dealing with the energy. Okay, I'm sort of taking in the question that you asked. So the sage is, let's say, already not confused, right? Like they're not sort of tempted to or reflexively or impulsively making that confusion of uh going to this narrative should, etc.
Yeah.
And um and let's take a simple case first. Suppose that it's we have one adult sage and the one adult sage is doing something and that something breaks the lamp. So no kid for a moment, just to like
Yeah.
take this sort of simpler case. Um, there's a kind of transparent allowing of what it feels like to have broken the lamp. And, I can't name in advance what that's going to be in the same way I can't name in advance what you'll want to do at 2 minutes into a song when you're dancing with someone. Because it's like, well, that depends on the song and the dance and all the whole situation.
Yeah.
And you'll want to attune to that. And even if I know that 2 minutes in there's a drop, I still don't know what you're going to want to do at the moment of the drop because that depends on them anyway. So there's like an allowing of that feeling. It might involve going, ah, it might involve crying. It might involve like being with the just the oh no, and like feeling the loss of the future of that lamp sitting in the place where it is or whatever. Um uh I had a memory come up just then of at one point when I was 17 and 18, I put my guitar back on its stand. And I sort of didn't put it all the way back in the stand. And the stand tipped over, and the guitar fell onto the kind of pretty hard tile floor. And this is a different guitar, but just to illustrate, the head pulled by the tension of the strings, even though the guitar had smashed on this face, like this was the face that hit the ground, the head went and like wrenched forward from the tension and the striking. And so it broke. And my guitar, which I maybe had just found out earlier that year was actually like a pretty like cool antique that was like made in Japan and whatever and had been redone and was really nice, was now broken. And I was like, and I like freaked out. I was alone in my room, and I freaked out, and I think in many ways my response was actually quite mature, and by that I'm including the freaking out. Like there was like a um but I don't think I was that like regretful or shouldy or not it. There was just like a oh God, like this is the end of my guitar. And it turned out I was able to repair the guitar. Still have this guitar, sounds great,
Nice.
works great, has a little chip out of the head. Couldn't sell it for nearly as much as it maybe would have been worth before, but I never wanted to sell it. It was my first guitar and I loved it. And now it sort of feels like even more clearly my guitar that I'll never sell because who would want to buy a guitar that like has this big injury? Even
Right.
though it works fine. But it's just like um but like I just let it all in, let it hit me, let it overwhelm me, etc. Um, Now an additional dimension would be suppose that, again, going back to Sage smashes lamp, no kid around, but Sage has, let's say, a wife, or a husband or whatever, and so there's an additional being with, oh, she's gonna be so upset when she comes home. Like, maybe,
Mm.
right? She's potentially, she is going to also be upset when she discovers that this lamp is broken. Like, there's a anticipated empathetic pain as well. And maybe she's going to be mad at me, like frustrated, like some sense towards me of um eh, like, what's the version of this without the should, right? Like, I mean, maybe the partner will have a should, but suppose that
Right.
the wife is also a sage. Um, uh, there's going to be, like, a grieving together, perhaps, an energetic
Yeah.
frustration and pain and so forth on her part, and then and there may also be some sense of like distrust or something. And I think that
Yeah.
really depends on to what extent this feels like something like an isolated incident versus something
Yeah.
like um a pattern.
Yeah. Like there will be a judgment issued, basically.
Uh
Because judgments are issued in relation to actions and consequences and stuff.
yeah, I
And like what the nature of that judgment will totally depend on the nature of the situation and how many times it's happened before and all sorts of things.
yeah, I sometimes reserve the word judgment for narrower, like more specific stuff than that, but
Hmm.
we don't need to go into that right now. It's sort of
Yeah.
not the point, I don't think. But the point is she'll have some sort of experience and you will be dealing with
Yeah.
that in addition to and that is part of the consequences of smashing the lamp.
Right.
Like that experience as well.
Yeah.
Just as much as the glass that now has to be cleaned up or whatever.
Yeah.
And so then returning to this more complex situation with the kid throws ball, kid smashes lamp. I'm what is now way more important to me in this situation, if I'm the sage or the parent, whatever. The What's way more important to me in this situation is how is how is this learning experience going for the kid? And if I think that the lamp is more important, then I have a confusion, I think. Like
Right.
I think uh,
Yeah, you've misplaced your priorities, obviously.
yeah. Now, there are situations like suppose the kid did something that was potentially going to be life-threatening for like one of the other kids or something. I don't know. Like there are situations in which the scale could be high enough that actually there's something else that's sort of more important, maybe. But these are rare. These are quite rare. I want to be assuming that I'm not like by default. My assumption is that like what's much more important is the kids learning, and so I'm inhibiting my some of my initial reaction, and part of
Right.
why I'm doing that is, or I'm sort of certainly inhibiting expressing it, but part of why I'm
Yeah.
doing that is because I want to find out what the kid's response is.
Yeah.
I want to make space for them to have their reaction. And if you take a kid who's already grown up in a household that's been doing original spin, basically, um, that kid is probably going to already be having the confusion of, oh God, they're
Right.
going to be so mad at me, and like already distracted from what actually happened. And
Yeah.
both like the distracted from the falling of the lamp and its now smashedness and all of that implies, and distracted from what exactly did they do moments before, because they're now like, oh God, like, turned away. I like the way
Yeah.
that like original spin sort of has this turning away from the
Yeah.
thing.
You turn toward something that's about to blame you instead of toward the thing that happened.
Yeah. And but if the but suppose that the kid has not been sufficiently spun by that point in their life, then the kid is probably in part gonna be looking to the parent like, oh God, is this bad? I don't know. Right? Like kids often take their cues from parents.
Yeah.
And um and at that point I might express some of the emotional response that I'm having. You
Right.
know, which might be just something like, "Oh no. Oh, like oh, wow, it's broken, you know, like I don't know what I would say. It would depend on the situation, right? But
Yeah.
a kind of like and then but like in that I would be inviting them to resonate with my feeling or something like a kind of do they also and sort of like I would be attempting to not kind of overbear them with my feeling, even leaving aside the whole spin thing, but to sort of have a bit of a response and see if there's sort of a response in them, like and a kind of like oh what happened, which is a kind of open what happened, which is different from
Right.
like a what happened, right? Which kind of jams a bit more. And then and then I think basically like if the and to some extent this would depend on the kids like age and moreover developmental stage, which is you know somewhat correlated with age. Um, if the kid does feel like they sort of get the consequences, like if the kid is like fairly verbal, like let's say they're like 4 or 5 or something, um, then I imagine the sage in this situation basically just like asking the kid like sort of inquiring like what's going on for the kid, and one question that might show up at some point is like do you feel like you understand how to throw a ball indoors without that happening again,
Right.
um and letting the kid sort of assess their own like did they learn from that sufficiently, and you could also like do some situational awareness stuff that's kind of like maybe you know maybe things are pretty good but hey look there's these wine glasses on the table, let's move those before we do more throwing inside, like kind of they're like attuning to the reality that like there's like some scale of throwing inside that's always safe like this or something like that, um and then there's like some other scale that's like safe if you've like put away a few glass things, and so maybe there's a kind of attending to the environment with them and the sort of helping them like orient to that, and if the kid is like at an earlier stage where they can't understand the like where they're sort of not seeing the consequences or not sort of clearly learning from them, then I'm not sure. Like I don't have a clear sense of that. Like um but there would definitely be like attempting to point those consequences out sort of prior to um prior to making any sort of like you can't throw the ball in anymore at all injunction, which is what you were describing, like sort of like many parents default thing. It's like um
Right.
jumping to a big consequence. Um,
Right.
and again, it
Um,
just it's so striking, like missing the actual consequence, like the tangible intrinsic consequence.
yeah. It's interesting. Like, yeah, I don't know. Happens all the time. This is dumb. People
Yeah,
do this all the time.
yeah,
It's one of the things that annoyed me the most about orgs also was like how much of a corporation exists to like properly handle spin on mistakes or something. If like and by
yeah,
properly I mean like of course improper, like the whole
yeah.
apparatus
Properly
exists
according
to
to
like
the yeah,
delegate, judge, and control spin on mistakes
yeah,
and direct it basically. So maybe
yeah,
like to direct spin on mistakes.
yeah.
And of course this makes sense in some ways because all of like removing spin and kind of like what we were saying about affective and tactile communication, like all of this relies on non-adversarial environments. They have to be collaborative environments.
Mm-hmm.
I think in an adversarial environment, like everything changes because we're trying to trick each other. And when you're trying to trick someone, you have a very different
Right.
relationship to
Yeah,
whether or not you blame or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Um,
But it ends up like really destroying the commons. Like a kind of a
yeah,
parallel example that I thought of when you first mentioned the one where like, you know, the lamp smashes, then it's like no more throwing indoors, right? Is there's some business book I read at some point. Um said like try not to institute like policies for one-off problems as like a heuristic in
Yeah.
business. And the example they give is like suppose that your work has a policy that's like employees can order any books they want.
Yeah.
And one employee orders like 40 Harlequin novels or like, 40 mystery whatevers, or it's just something that was sort of like
Yeah.
not the point of that policy. Like the point of the policy is, maybe a novel on occasion that's like inspirational related to the business, but mostly like, you know, books that are on some level like business, like related to the business or the industry or whatever.
Yeah.
And what they and this thing described how like one company when this happened, what they did was they instituted like now you can order a book as an employee, but you have to like get it cleared by
Yeah,
HR
like novel
something.
review process
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah. And like, first of all, you're making more work for
Yeah, now
people.
you have like novel review employees.
Yeah, but right, but secondly, like there are many books that just aren't going to get ordered anymore because they have to get justified or they have to go through this
Yeah.
whatever.
You've added costs.
And that friction cost is going to change not just how much happens, but what happens at all. Like,
Yeah.
edgy books that might have been inspiring. I can't bother explaining this or whatever. And what they highlight is like, instead, you could just point out to everybody, like, guys, that's not what you guys know that's not what this policy is for. We are pretty sure we were clear about that. Like, or maybe we weren't clear enough. If there's like a pattern of something among that employee, maybe you even kick out that employee or whatever, but like
Yeah.
probably not. Sort of depends. And then you just leave the policy because it was like the free, order whatever books you want on the company, whatever. You leave it because it mostly was working.
Yeah.
And there's like the kind of like the mostly working and like, oh, but they made a mistake. Like, right. And how costly was that mistake? Like, those novels are not that costly.
Yeah. Well, and then how costly is your response? Is like always
Yeah.
like ignoring the cost of the response. How costly is your freak out when the lamp gets broken? Or like how
Yeah.
costly is you blaming your kid for their mistakes on top, like to their development or to their
Yeah.
learning or to their trauma or whatever?
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
anyway.
So,
Okay.
original
I have to
spin.
go
Yeah.
because I have interview,
Okay.
but I want to talk more about parenting. I think
Yeah.
this was good.
Let's do it.
All right. Peace, Malcolm.
Peace.